All right, let's talk about these transformations that we didn't do so great on the last quiz. I'm not going to do this whole worksheet. I'll probably only do this part, and then the rest you can do on your own. You've gotten pretty good at the other two parts, but this one we kind of struggled with on the quiz. So the first problem says f of x is the absolute value of 1/3 x. We want to write a function that is a translation 6 units to the left. So for number 1, a translation 6 units to the left is f of x plus 6, which means I'm going to replace the x with x plus 6 in parentheses. So I'm taking that, and I have the absolute value of 1/3 times the translation x plus 6 and my absolute value. This was the number one mistake made on the quiz, is you didn't write your function notation and then you didn't plug it in correctly. I can't just add 6 inside. So this distributes, and I get the absolute value of 1/3 x, and 1/3 of 6 is 2. That's my new function g of x. 1/3 x. Absolute value 1/3 x plus 2. Number 2. We'll do number 2 in red. F of x is negative absolute value of x plus 9 minus 1. We want to do a translation. So this is number 1. This is number 2. Translation 6 units down, followed by a reflection in the x-axis. So we're going to do it in that order. First we're going to do f of x minus 6. So that means I subtract x on the 6 on the outside. So negative absolute value of x plus 9 minus 1. There's my f of x part, and then minus the 6. And there's nothing to do to the parentheses, so I'm going to just add the -1 and the -6. And I get negative absolute value of x plus 9 minus 7. And the next is reflection in the x-axis. So that's negative f of x, which means negative times the whole function, minus 7. So that has to distribute in front and distribute behind it. I didn't mean for it to be highlighted. So we get positive absolute value of x plus 9 plus 7. Number 3 is -2 square root of x plus 2, translation 7 right, followed by reflection in the x-axis as well. So we have 7 right, which is f of x minus 7. We're going to do that first. -2 square root. The x gets replaced with x minus 7 plus 2 on the outside. And there's nothing to simplify. And then next we're going to do the reflection in the x-axis, which again is negative f of x. The y-axis is when the negative's on the inside. So I'm going to multiply the whole thing by a negative. And I get positive 2 square root x minus 7 minus 2. Okay. So if you need to pause the video, because I'm going to erase this so I have space for the rest of it. Okay. We are now looking at number 4, which I accidentally cut off the numbers when I copy this in. We're going to do a vertical stretch factor of 4 followed by a translation up 3. And we just follow the directions of, or the order of the directions here. So a vertical stretch factor of 4, vertical is on the outside, so it's 4 times f of x. And this is number 4. And that means I multiply the whole function by 4. 1/2 square root of x plus 8. And 1/2 times 4 is 2 square root of x, and 4 times 8 is 32. So don't forget, it needs to distribute to both numbers. And then I'm going to do a translation up 3. That's f of x plus 3. So I take 2 square root of x plus 32 and add 3, and I get 2 square root x plus 35. Number 5 says a reflection in the y-axis followed by a horizontal stretch factor of 4. So when I do a reflection in the y-axis, that's f of negative x. So that's 4 plus the absolute value of negative x plus 1. And then a horizontal stretch factor of 4 is f of horizontal's reciprocal. So what goes in the equation is the reciprocal of the factor. So 1/4 x, f of 1/4 x. And so that's 4 plus the absolute value of negative 1/4 x plus 1. And there's no simplifying to do there. Number 6, a vertical shrink factor of 1/2, followed by a vertical translation down 2. So number 6, we get a vertical shrink factor of 1/2. Vertical's on the outside, so 1/2 f of x, which is 1/2 times negative 8x plus 4. And that gives me negative 4x plus 2. And then a translation f of x minus 2 down 2, that's on the outside, so that's negative 4x plus 2 minus 2, and that just gives me negative 4x. Okay, once again, if you need to copy this down, go ahead and do so, but I'm gonna erase it so we can move on. And the second to last, number 7, horizontal shrink factor of 2/3, followed by a vertical translation up 7. So remember that the horizontal shrink factor is the reciprocal, so that's f of 3 over 2x. That looks really ugly. And I'm going to plug that in, so negative 6. The 3 over 2 goes into parentheses instead of the x, and then plus 3. And 2 goes into 6 3 times, and 3 times 3 is 9, so I get negative 9x plus 3. And I did that in the wrong color, that should have been red, blue. And then f of x plus 7, so that's negative 9x plus 3 plus 7, which is negative 9x plus 10. And the last one here, vertical translation up 3, followed by a horizontal stretch factor of 2. That is, let's see, number 8. Horizontal stretch factor, or no, vertical translation up 3. So f of x plus 3. So that's x minus 3 squared plus 1 plus 3, which is x minus 3 squared plus 4. You really don't want to FOIL this out until the very, very end. So don't do any of that till the end. And then horizontal stretch factor of 2, remember it goes in as a reciprocal, so that ends up being f of 1/2 x. So that's 1/2 x, replaces the x, minus 3 squared plus 4. And then you could FOIL that out. I do want to look at another example. I want to look at an example, just let's say f of x equals the square root of x minus 3 plus 5. And let's say we want a horizontal shrink factor of factor 1/6 and a horizontal translation are followed by left 8. So these ones are important. These are the ones that are going to be more on the test, like the ones on your quiz, where you really have to know what you're doing. So the horizontal shrink factor of 1/6 is f of 6x. So that's the square root of 6x replaces the x, minus 3, and then plus 5. And then what's next is a horizontal translation left 8. That's f of x plus 8. Okay, when this goes in, it's 6. The x plus 8 replaces the x in parentheses. And then minus 3 and plus our 5 out here. And this has to distribute. So we get the square root of 6x plus 48 minus 3. And then we can simplify square root of 6x plus 45 plus 5. So important that you don't forget to distribute here and take the time to write it in your function notation.